Hey everyone, a quick story. 2 years ago, I'd ridden my bike to Venice Beach. I sat there with my journal and sketched out some ideas for my next steps in life. At the time, I was working at Spotify, producing 2 very popular weekly sports podcasts hosted by some very famous people. But in my journal, I wrote, quote, "I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of being behind the scenes. I grew up on stages, and I need to get back to performing. It's when I feel most alive, when I feel most like me." End quote. Well, 2 years later, I'm so proud to say that I've appeared on a number of stages since that journal entry, most recently this past Friday for Seacoast Singles at 3S Art Space. And on Thursday, May 7th, I'm doing it again, this time for Seacoast Stories Live from Stone Church in Newmarket. On this very special evening, I'm interviewing La Mulita coffee owner Max Pruna, as well as Portsmouth's very own Stephanie Shaheen, the daughter of former Governor Jeanne Shaheen and the mother of past podcast guest Ellie Shaheen. Plus, local musician Caitlin Piper will play a couple songs from her soon-to-be released album. This live show is presented by Chinburg Properties, and if you want to be reminded again of just how powerful this Seacoast community is, then I'd love to invite you to join us. It's an intimate venue, so seats are limited. Secure yours today by visiting the events link in the show notes. Now on to today's episode. Welcome to Seacoast Stories, a weekly podcast where we interview the people and businesses of New Hampshire and Maine. I'm Troy Vargas. I've produced some of the most popular podcasts in the world. And since moving to the Seacoast in 2023, I've fallen in love with the area and its inspiring people. And now I'm on a mission to bring the Seacoast closer together, one podcast at a time. Today, a man who needs no introduction, but let me try anyway. Chef Evan Mallett is the owner of the Black Trumpet, the culinary hidden gem tucked away on Ceres Street in downtown Portsmouth. Evan is a 6-time James Beard Foundation semifinalist for Best Chef in the Northeast. He has served on the boards of Chefs Collaborative, Slow Food Seacoast, and most recently, Cultivate New Hampshire, a nonprofit that he co-founded, which serves as an umbrella organization for local food and culture celebrations such as New England BIPOC Fest and Pharmacue, 2 can't-miss events of the jam-packed Seacoast summer to come. Additionally, he's the founder of the Culinary Arts program at Great Bay Community College, a program he launched in 2024 to train future chefs. He's also the author of Black Trumpet, a chef's journey through 8 New England seasons, an award-winning book published a decade ago. Now, when you say any of this in front of Evan, he'll immediately change the subject to other things because he's a very humble man and doesn't love the spotlight. He'll then talk your ear off instead about perhaps the topsy-turvy routes that the potato took to land on your plates for dinner last night, or maybe his strong opinions on America and its future. He's a man deeply committed to social justice and to leaving the world better than how he found it. And for that, I have the utmost respect for him. So on today's episode, the former Boston food critic and I bond over our shared media backgrounds. He talks about his 2 years spent in the happiest place in the world, like actually though, that's not an exaggeration, more on that later, and how, despite never having a proper culinary education, he came to own a world-class restaurant that's lasted nearly 20 years in Portsmouth. Plus, how the 2020 murder of George Floyd inspired top Portsmouth leaders like Evan, David Vargas, and Jo Kelley to take action, and why Evan believes it's the role of restaurants to give everyone a seat at the table. All of that and more to come, but first, Evan didn't grow up on the Seacoast. The son of divorced parents, he split his childhood between Boston, Cape Cod, and the DC area. He didn't come from money, but his father made a point to treat Evan to a fancy dinner for special occasions every once in a while, even if he didn't have the money to pay for it. And with an African-American stepfather, Evan got a first-hand look at diversity and its importance in shaping a community. In 1998, he moved to the Seacoast to be closer to family. But before we get there, Evan takes us through his college years in Washington, D.C., where his culinary origin story begins.
I was living in Georgetown with my father, and I started working in a restaurant. And that restaurant I was between colleges. I went to a lot of colleges. Didn't graduate from any. I'm not proud of that, but I, in the process, ended up in Washington, D.C., an incredibly, wonderfully diverse environment. When it came to food, it meant that almost any nationality, any culture was available to taste. And you could literally taste around the world without leaving a single neighborhood. So I moved from Georgetown to a neighborhood called Mount Pleasant, which now is what it sounds like. But at the time, its nickname was Mount Unpleasant. There was regular violence. There were curfews. So it was in what was a transition from it being a very scary neighborhood to actually becoming a gentrified neighborhood. Now it's way gentrified, but at the time, there were a couple of populations that had kind of moved in and created an opportunity for themselves there. And one of them was the Salvadoran community. So we had pupuserias everywhere, and the food was just so authentic. These were not like our version in Portsmouth of ethnic cuisine that tends to be filtered through the eyes of European Americans and white folk. It was very authentic. And so I got to like talk to cab drivers about like their background, their experience, where they were from, where I should go to experience that food. And I became almost like an anthropologist's curiosity about the origins of food, the different techniques, procedures, cultural rites. And that, spanned a whole lot of stuff. And I was also at a reckless age. So I got myself in lots of trouble at the same time.
Ooh, how so?
But I was just, I was a reckless kid. There was a 7-to-1 ratio of females to males, I was told at the time, in Georgetown.
Oh.
So anytime you would go out to a bar, it was just like, a free for all, basically. So I definitely consumed too much stuff. I would limit it to alcohol, but I didn't. So anyway, it was wild times, late 80s, early 90s.
Plot, as the kids say today.
Yeah. There were moments where I saw in the restrooms that I had to clean at the end of the night of the first restaurant I worked in, people who were on the A list in Washington doing cocaine off of each other's body parts. So
really?
That was a real thing.
Want to reveal any names?
No, not right. Not now, not to you. We can talk later if you want names, but suffice to say that those people are mostly infamous on their own, and they don't need my reinforcement for that. So yeah, the DC thing was all about knowledge of world cuisine. And then my time in Boston I was with my mom and I came back. Actually, there was a curfew in DC that meant I couldn't work in restaurants at night. Like my typical night would start at like 4 and then end at around 2 or 3 in the morning. But the curfew was at, I think, midnight, 11 or midnight. So I couldn't literally get back to my neighborhood. And so I left the city and I left all of the recklessness behind, or at least most of it. Ended up coming back to Boston. And can I just continue the narrative?
Yeah, wait, hold on. I do want to pause.
You want to stop? Yeah.
So on DC, I imagine as a college age kid, pretty cool foundation to have, because it's, as you said, it's, food wise, such a melting pot, restaurants wise, culturally, such a transient place, people from all over the world traveling in and out of Washington. I imagine for an impressionable kid who's just trying to soak up as much knowledge about the world, pretty cool place to come of age.
It was a mix of experiences in that I had a group of friends who I had made there. I had some family there, but almost everyone who I became close to there were people I met through the restaurant, and can't recite exactly like their countries of origin, but suffice to say that almost all of them weren't from there. As you say, it was a transient community and people were, there for a lot of different reasons. And each of those stories was incredible to me. So yeah, I've kept that with me. But also while I was in DC, before I moved back to Boston, I got a couple of gigs writing for marketing companies. And in the back of my mind, if you'd asked me as a teenager, even into my early 20s, like what I wanted to be, what I wanted to do, I never would have said chef. I never would have said cook. I never would have said anything to do with restaurants. But I would have told you I wanted to be a writer. And
so when you first worked that restaurant job in DC, you had no dreams of taking it beyond that.
Exactly right. Okay. It was to make money and to get my father off my back. And he actually helped me get that first restaurant job because he knew the owner. So yeah, that was the direction that I never saw coming. And as anyone who's ever tried to write for a living will tell you, that doesn't come easily. And my career when I went back to Boston, started with doing some advertising, copywriting, marketing writing, PR firms, things like that. And then I lied about my past and my resume, and I applied for a job at the Boston Phoenix, which is an alternative newspaper. I got a job in their marketing department and started doing a lot of their ad copy and writing there. And then a friend of mine from high school was the classical music reviewer, which most publications don't have at all, for arts and entertainment newspaper called The Improper Bostonian. And at the time, it was a relatively new publication, and they were looking for a dining critic. So that led me to, again, falsify information about my past. And when I met with the publisher of the newspaper, I left that interview knowing that the ruse was going to work and that he would come away from that interview thinking that I was qualified to be a dining critic.
So how were you embellishing?
Well, I think I don't remember the exact information that I gave him, but I know that in conversation, he alluded to the things I had done, which I, had to then make up some stories about. And I'm not advocating for that for anyone who's that age. I just had a kind of a spotty academic record, so there wasn't a lot to point to. And when you're that age, you don't have like a resume really to get you to that next level. So again, I'm not advocating, but I do say that sometimes you have to reach beyond what you think you're capable of to get to that level. And so I managed to do that, became the dining critic of the Improper Bostonian.
Wow.
Met my now wife of 28 years, and we ultimately moved in together. But for a while we were dating, I was working actually for a number of different publications in Boston, because once you have a byline and you're, a visible writer in the community, then other opportunities pop up. So that led me to believe that I was going to have a career as a journalist, or at least a writer in some capacity. Okay. And then we had to start paying bills, and they weren't, the gigs weren't consistent.
You mean the media is not a stable career?
No, you don't know that?
No, I won't.
How long have you been doing this, Troy?
A while. All right. So let me stop you. I don't really know much about the life as a food critic. Take me into the day-to-day life as a food critic.
Well, I'll tell you what I thought it was. And what I thought it was that I could use my column as a creative entity, a creative channel for me to write original thought about an experience that, while I knew I was underqualified, I could in my own way share that experience in a way that was entertaining. And I think I succeeded at that. But what the reality ended up being was that for a publication that size that depends on advertising, a lot of times it's the advertising that dictates who you're reviewing and how you're reviewing them. And I understand that from a business perspective, but at the time I didn't understand it from an integrity perspective. Yep. So I bailed eventually.
So does a restaurant invite you to come? Does your editor assign you, hey, you're going here tonight?
So it can be any of those things. The first, the most common would be the editor has a recommendation for a place to go. And in an ideal scenario, the reviewer, the critic, can opt out if that doesn't work out. But so there's usually like a list of places.
Yeah.
But the more I did it, the more I realized that list was really being dictated by the restaurants that were paying for advertising.
Gotcha. But you're not necessarily beholden to give them a glowing review.
It was implicit that I was.
Okay. Yeah. If they're paying for it.
Yeah. I don't think it was contractual. In fact, I know it wasn't, but it was implicit for sure.
Okay.
Maybe not glowing, but at least something that wouldn't make them want to pull their ad.
Yeah. So when you have a food critic at the Black Trumpet, do you even know if you have a food critic at the Black Trumpet?
I've known a few over time. I honestly don't know the last time someone who was like that kind of food critic came in here, but there's a funny story that when we first opened Black Trumpet, there was a well-known food critic in town named Rachel Forrest, who still occasionally writes for Seacoast online, and I've since been to her home in Belize, where she now lives and has lived for many years. She's a good friend and colleague, I would say, in the food community, because she's part of our greater network of chefs and restaurants that she was a big part of helping identify early on. And she was one of the earliest proponents of building this amazing food community that we have in Portsmouth. She was the first critic who came in to Black Trumpet after we opened, and it was right after we opened. And I think that when she tells the story, it's a little bit more articulate, but essentially what she said in the review is that she didn't understand what the majority of things were on the menu. And this is someone who's a food professional, but she said that everything that she had was fantastic. So I'm abbreviating considerably, but suffice to say that the reputation that she put out there for Black Trumpet was, this menu is going to look foreign to you. There's going to be a lot of unfamiliar items, techniques, language. But that was a calculated decision on my part because A, I'm a dork, and B, I love food so much that I want my experience and education in food to be contagious. And I want that to be something that not only trickles through our staff, but they're the educators who then have to pass that along to our guests.
Yeah.
So 19 years later, I feel like we still do that. We still explore different ingredients and diasporas. And, if we want to do a rabbit hole, we could talk about appropriation versus appreciation. But suffice to say that my super geeky curiosity about food, its origins, its travels, the journey of the potato, like I could just talk to you for hours.
That's
about
the title
that.
of the episode, The Journey of the Potato.
So things like that, help inform our menu and in some ways distinguish it, I think, from other menus that you see out there.
Are food critics even still a thing anymore? I mean, obviously in the big cities, but I feel like your food critics nowadays in smaller communities like this are kind of like the local influencers, like the people with like big followings.
I think that's where it's at now. Yeah, I definitely think it's the influencers that have taken the place of the conventional food critics. And is there even a food column that you know of where there's a dining critic outside of major cities?
Boston Globe. Do they have one? I imagine they have one.
Yeah, I think they have a new one, actually.
I wonder if the Portland Press Herald, I would think they would.
I just don't know I think they're food writers writ large. It's not like a specific dining critic role anymore. But, I'm a dinosaur, and back in those days, it was still a thing.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, you introduced the concept of a rabbit hole, appreciation versus appropriation. What exactly do you mean by that?
So with kids who were very sensitive to some of the ideologies that we now associate with being woke, they brought to my attention early on that some of the things on my menu were potentially appropriating from certain cultures. And that appropriation by definition, I guess, is if I'm a white male coming from relative privilege, which I am, and I have a restaurant where I'm charging a lot of money for a dish, and that dish owes its origin and inspiration to a culture that is marginalized, historically marginalized, or maybe in reality around us marginalized. That is probably the best definition of appropriation. Whereas the counter argument that I make is that I care deeply about these cultures and have made it part of my work outside of the restaurant to embrace these cultures that are meaningful in our community, to shine a light on them and remind people of the diversity that we don't necessarily see and think about. But putting those things on my menu is a way of me paying homage, or there's not a female word for homage. Femage should be a word, right? And just, honoring those traditions that often are invisible. And I think we sometimes associate what used to be called ethnic cuisine with sort of like with street food, which people frowned on until Michelin recently gave a star to a taco stand in Mexico City. That's always been, I think, a subconscious association of people in our community who maybe didn't come from a background like that. And so I'm not excusing, or I'm not pardoning myself from the idea of appropriation. I'm really just saying that when we are borrowing an idea from a culture that is not our own, we need to be prepared to define it, celebrate it, embrace it, and share it out so that others can hopefully celebrate it as well.
Yeah, this raises a really good point because I mean, I imagine this is such a sticky thing. I mean, it would be appropriation, I think, if you had a food from Africa just to check a box and say in your listing, hey, on your website, hey, we have food from Africa. We have food from all 7 continents or whatever. But to your point, to be really prepared to be able to talk about it, educated to tell exactly about the region that this particular dish is inspired, the history, or maybe you've traveled there and you saw it firsthand, like that feels like appreciation.
Yeah, a lot of the menu stuff I've done has been influenced by travel, and there's a part of the story that we didn't quite get to where we were living in that house in Rye, and we thought politically the worst thing that could happen in our country was the election of George W. Bush, and now we look back on that and we're like, please, can we have him back? But anyway, that led
the year 2000
to 9/11, yeah, and. The restaurant I was working in here in Portsmouth was called Ciento. It was a Spanish tapas themed restaurant that had a short life. And when it closed, there was a flamenco guitarist who was playing every Sunday for brunch there. And he, when the restaurant closed, approached me to say that his mother was looking to open a restaurant in a little town in Mexico. She herself was Mexican. He was Mexican. And she was moving from Mexico City to this town. And would I be able to be a consultant on her creating this dream restaurant in this town? So I had maybe 8 words of Spanish at that point in my life. And I'd studied
not that much restaurant experience.
Not that much restaurant either.
You
no.
just made the pivot.
Yeah, exactly.
From
exactly.
You realized that this ain't it.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you decided you want to make restaurants your thing, or?
Well, I was giving it a shot. Okay. I was still writing on the side, but definitely moving into, having a steadier paycheck, which was the agreement I had with my spouse. We got married. And then the guy approached me about his mother wanting to open a restaurant. I, took whatever little savings we had and I bought a plane ticket down, and then for about a week, I was there helping this woman open her restaurant. And in the course of that time, I became just enchanted, bewitched by this community that was so warm and welcoming and diverse in a weird way, because like the minority population of this town were expatriated Americans, Canadians, and Europeans. But the culture of the very historical culture of that, it's really a city called San Miguel de Allende. And I lived there, or I was there for 7 days. And then I remember clearly phoning from a payphone. We had no cell phones yet. Phoning my wife with our newborn daughter at home and saying that I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be able to come home because it was such a magical place. And there was a pause on the line, maybe my daughter crying in the background. And then my wife goes, get your ass home right now and we can talk about it. So that's how that went down. And then the Twin Towers fell, chaos erupted, and our country was in a shambles. We thought about the future of our child and ultimately children. And we thought, let's give this a shot. So she had been laid off from her job. My restaurant had closed. We were in this very pregnant space for change. And we took that as a very visible sign that we needed to take this chance, and we did. And so we just packed our Hyundai wagon and stuck our daughter in a car seat, and we drove all the way to central Mexico, this little historical town. This town was, and I may not get this number exactly right, but it's one of its claims to fame was that the federal government approached the city saying, you have too many holidays. So, and I think the number was like 220, 230 holidays a year. So they said, a lot of these aren't real and you can't have that many holidays. So we're going to fine you. And I forget what fine they levied on this poor community. Not poor at all, by the way, but whatever that fine was, the city didn't hesitate to say, we'll just pay the fine. Because we like to party. And so that's they just kept all those holidays. And it is actually crazy if it's still true. And I don't know that they still celebrate all of them, but it's every week there's multiple things going on that come with parades and celebrations and music and festivities and dancing and color. And it's such a great way to live. And so we got wrapped up in that, and we enjoyed, there were fireworks also regularly, sometimes like right behind your head. And so anyone who's been in like an urban environment where the sound of an explosion is alarming, you had to overcome that to get to being celebratory with all that noise.
So whenever something bad in America happens, a common refrain is you hear from people, I'm moving to Mexico, I'm moving to Canada, I'm moving to Europe, whatever. And so the Twin Towers fall, the US enters into war with Afghanistan, and you guys actually do that. You do leave the country. And was a big motivation for that actually just like America's might be going to shit right now, I don't want to be here?
Yeah. I mean, how many people are saying that right now?
Yeah, of course.
That was us then.
But they don't actually do it.
Well, some will do it and some won't. The majority won't do it for sure, depending on how bad things get. But suffice to say that in that moment, there were so many other factors that made it possible. It's not like, we were wild cards and we were just people who lived by the seat of our pants and moved around. We were about to build our future, right? We had this house that we were going to renovate. We were
in Portsmouth.
In Rye, yeah. And so we had something to look forward to, but with all of the unknowns and all of the, joblessness and trying to start from scratch, why not try that somewhere else, somewhere that maybe offered something different? And so that's what we found.
So was this just a temporary move always? We're doing this for a year. We're doing this for 2 years.
What we did was, and this was probably attributable to the wisdom of my partner, who has an infinite amount of it. Mine is only sketchy and spotty at best, but she, I think, was the one who originally said, we're going to go down there. If we hate it, we come back. If we stay for a year and we decide that there's reason to come back, we come back. If we decide that there's reason to settle and, build our futures there, then we'll know that and we'll do that. And then we don't come back. So there was that arbitrary where like, we just had an agreement that if things ever got weird or uncomfortable for either of us, then we would just come home.
Well, you did come home.
We came home.
Why did you decide to come home?
Our son was on the way, and that was just part of it. We missed family. We had a lot of connections here that it was a pretty long commute for them to come visit. For our parents, their grandchildren were thousands of miles away. And then, we had friends as well who would come and visit us and be like, when are you guys coming home? And eventually, again, job related stuff, like we really weren't going anywhere. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to grow. We could have bought a house with cash that we had because there's like real estate was so inexpensive. And I kind of regret that we didn't do that, to be honest. But
you should have done that.
But there are no other regrets. I feel like it was just time. It was just time.
Coming up, how the Black Trumpet comes to be and how this Seacoast staple has survived 20 years in the tough local restaurant scene. That's next. But I just found out about another Seacoast business doing big things. Last week, I visited a dermatology practice that, like Evan Mallett, is doing things the right way. Dermatology Skin and Health is a physician-owned dermatology practice, locally owned and operated since 2004. They are an SRC Center of Excellence for Mohs micrographic surgery, and Dr. Mendizi himself is an SRC Surgeon of Excellence. In simpler terms, that means they've been independently verified to meet the highest possible standards for safety, quality, and experience in the most precise form of skin cancer removal. They are the only practice in all of New England and one of just 2 in the entire country with both of these credentials. Wow. They offer medical, cosmetic, and surgical dermatology, everything from acne and psoriasis to skin cancer screenings to Botox, filler, and laser treatments. They accept all insurances and have locations on the North Shore of Massachusetts, southern Maine, 2 in Dover, plus 1 in Newington. And with May being Melanoma and Skin Cancer Awareness Month, this is your friendly reminder to get that skin check scheduled. Plus, you can also head to their website, link in the show notes, and you can get 15% off your next cosmetic treatment at any DSH location by simply mentioning Seacoast Stories at checkout. That's 15% off for some of the best Botox, filler, and laser treatments in the country. And perhaps after getting a treatment, you'll feel extra motivated to pay a visit to a dear friend of the show, Andrea Schwanbeck of Tacks Photography. If you know me, you know I will volunteer to be in front of a camera at the drop of a hat. But I also know a lot of you aren't like that. And when you hear family photo session, you immediately feel the same dread as realizing that you've forgotten your ID while standing in line to enter D Street Tavern. What a nightmare. I couldn't imagine it. Here's the good news though, it doesn't have to feel that way for you. That's because we have Andrea and her business, Tacks Photography, right here on the Seacoast. Her whole approach is built around real life, relaxed, playful, zero pressure for perfect behavior. Because honestly, the chaos is where the magic is. That's where the real smiles live. The kid who won't sit down, the dog who photobombs, the windblown hair over by Prescott Park, that's the stuff you'll actually want to remember. Tacks has been capturing Seacoast families since 2010 because faces change, kids grow, pets come and go, but you will never regret having the photo. They offer everything from quick, seasonal, 30-minute mini sessions to fully customized family portraits to extended generational shoots where every branch of the family gets their own little moment, plus the big group shot for the holiday card. With Mother's Day coming up, this is a gift that actually lasts for your mom, your grandma, your wife. Not the flowers, not a candle. This is something that ends up on the shelf, on the wall, on the fridge for the next decade. And if you're picturing the stress of getting everyone dressed and out the door like you're trying to snag a last-minute Saturday reservation at the Black Trumpet, relax. Tacks keeps it light, easy, and genuinely fun, so you can just show up as yourselves. If this floats your boat, you can book your session now by visiting the sponsored section of the show notes. Thank you, Tacks, and to Dermatology, Skin, and Health for supporting the show. Now back to Evan. So, he's just spent 2 years in Mexico working as an executive chef at a Cajun restaurant. He's returned to New Hampshire with the ability to speak Spanish and also a lot more international culinary knowledge. So what lures him back to the Seacoast? I'll let him explain. You come back to Rye, your son is born here, and you are armed with the ability to speak Spanish, but also worldly culinary knowledge. So once you came back here, what direction did you take your career?
I left out an important piece of the story, which is an email that I got from the people who owned the restaurant in the location where Black Trumpet is today, who were friends of ours because Ciento was also their restaurant. And I had worked here in the kitchen of Lindbergh's Crossing, which was here at 29 Ceres Street, and at Ciento for them.
Ciento was where 100 Club is?
Yes, exactly. In the same building anyway. And the email that I got after we'd been down there for a while was that their chef was leaving. And I had worked under that chef and knew him well. But they were looking to replace him with someone who they could trust. And they reached out to me and said, what's the likelihood that you would ever come back? And I responded that things were going pretty well down there, but if that changed, I would let them know. And that went on for a while. And finally, we decided that that was the right move for us. So I came back to become the chef of Lindbergh's Crossing and did that for 3 years before. And the other bait that was dangled was if I became the chef, it wasn't going to be long after that they were going to be looking to move on and the opportunity to buy the restaurant would be presented. And at that time, we didn't really know how we were going to come up with the money to be able to buy the restaurant. But this also, if you remember, the year was 2007. And this was fatefully just shy of the mortgage collapse of 2008 and 9. And so at that time, banks were just giving out massive loans to schmucks like us. And we were... 2 young kids at home now, and Denise was employed, thankfully. But when I was working at Lindbergh's Crossing, had we not gotten that loan that a bank would never in a million years have given us today, we wouldn't be where we are today. We never would have had the ability to buy the restaurant without investors anyway.
Right. How different is Black Trumpet from what was here before it?
Oh, it's quite different in some ways. The The hardware is very similar. And we put up, different artwork. We took out some tables. We added some other things. But the software was different in the sense that when we opened Black Trumpet, the one undercurrent of philosophy or principle that mattered the most to us was that we were building a strong local economy and local food system around this ideology that sourcing locally lifted all boats. And in retrospect, I think we can look back and say that we were right about that.
Was that not the common standard at the time?
Not at all. No. The locavore movement and what we now call farm to table, two terms I don't really use.
I've never heard locavore before.
Oh, yeah. So there was an article, I think also in the New York Times, about the locavore movement, which was probably in the late 90s or early aughts. And they were making this argument that there were a handful of chefs in America at the time who were sourcing locally, not to the exclusion of all else, but at least in such a way that it made an impact on their menu and on their community. So I was looking at that and thinking about, why do I buy these ingredients from New Zealand? Why should any food have to travel all the way across the world before it ends up on someone's plate? And how do we justify that? And that was before I got into any knowledge of emissions and, the carbon footprint and things like that. So the ecological damage was almost secondary to me because I didn't know as much about it. But the principle of the matter was I had these amazing farmers that I knew, and they had a really hard time getting into restaurants. And there was a farmer's market that was growing at the time. So I would go to the farmer's market and I would meet all these incredible people, and many of them weren't selling to restaurants. So that was I think a move of the dial where we changed the way chefs were thinking about sourcing food in this community.
So it's far different now, you would say.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish it were entirely different now, but there's a reality that comes along with that, which is that it's often more expensive to source local food. And then that in turn means you have to charge a premium. Not every restaurant has a model like mine where it's considered fine dining because of the cost of the menu. And we're going to probably get to this, but I do want to say that it was not long after Black Trumpet was created that I started thinking a lot about my clientele and how that clientele had to be people of privilege, people who could afford a meal in my restaurant. And I didn't want to change how Black Trumpet was, but it made me want to use Black Trumpet as a vehicle to communicate my thoughts on why local food is important, but also what can we do to make local food accessible to everyone.
Interesting. Has there ever been an inner conflict being such a community man, and you have your hands in the weeds of so many things, education and nonprofits and festivals that often, seek to address problems experienced by underserved communities, that at your restaurant you serve an overserved community?
It didn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
It definitely was a conflict, and it remains a conflict. The way that I've chosen to address the conflict is to do all of the work that I do outside of the restaurant, knowing that I have the restaurant as a vehicle to communicate, and through our social media and through any of those channels that, my restaurant can reach, and through my own, social media. I've done everything that I can do in my power with the time that I have to make sure that I'm doing what I can to bring the message of the marginalized communities to the forefront. And that can be through affiliations with Gather, who I worked with very, very closely during the pandemic. And that was one of the maybe most satisfying things that's happened in my career, was taking food waste and bridging that gap between food waste and food insecurity, and working with Gather was such a wonderful collaboration, and it remains so to this day. And I love everything that they do, of course.
We love Gather.
In 2009, 2 years into Black Trumpet, I was approached by a couple of organizations that were nationwide about biodiversity. And the idea that they had spawned was that we needed in our food system to have more biodiversity. And at the time, they were really pointing toward this inclination toward monoculture and to having soil that's just deprived of nutrients because a single ingredient is grown, sometimes covering the span of an entire county in the Midwest. And I'm picking on the Midwest, but this was really something that was happening everywhere. So the idea of these heirloom varieties and things that really were enlightening to my curious brain and my desire to sort of tickle that anthropological itch that I had to learn.
Naturally.
And so I joined these organizations. One Slow Food International, and the other was called Chefs Collaborative. And I ended up becoming a board member in both of those organizations. But in the short term, we decided to create an event in a barn in Stratham. And I was working with a pair of farmers who worked on that farm. And they had a magnificent, 2-century-old barn that it was very, very easy to envision there being this glorious white tablecloth dinner. And I invited all my chef friends, and we all decided we were going to have a grow out of these heirloom ingredients that showed off the biodiversity that these farmers were growing. And then we were going to prepare those ingredients at this event and put out this incredible spread for over 100 people. Again, white tablecloth, candlelit, beautiful. People could walk around the farm, while they were waiting to be seated. And that became known as the barn dinner, not a super creative name. But it really put our chef community on the radar, not just locally, but nationally, for that ability to come together, collaborate, and produce this great thing, which, even though it was in a barn, we learned after a couple of years, because of feedback from farmers who felt uncomfortable sitting at a table because the people who were at the table had all paid a premium to be part of that experience. And those farmers were right. And they were saying, this kind of smacks of elitism, and you're bringing these people with a lot of money to the farm to sit there among us. And it wasn't a fundraiser for anything except to the continuation of that dinner. So the result of that was something I think you've heard of, called Pharmacue.
Love Pharmacue.
Pharmacue is an amazing event. And so the same farmers who started the barn dinner and the same chefs who were cooking at it, we got together. We had a little committee that were planning the barn dinners, and my wife Denise was part of that as well. And we created Pharmacue. And the idea was, we've got this elite thing, that's making the cover of magazines, and it's really cool. And all these chefs are getting lots of good press and celebrity status and all those things that chefs get. But we were now going to do the same thing in an open field on a beautiful farm that itself is an heirloom, multi-generational, incredibly spacious, beautiful, regenerative farm. And the farmers were very amenable to this idea. Initially, the idea of Pharmacue was going to be traveling from one farm to the next every year. So it was an annual event, and each year at a different farm. So we tried that for a while, but the first farm we went to was Tuckaway Farm in Lee. And it ended up being the perfect location. So after we went to 4 or 5 years of going to different farms, we landed back at Tuckaway, and we're like, I think this is our forever home if they're willing to have us. And the Cox family, I cannot say enough about. I cannot say anything.
Do they run Tuckaway?
They own Tuckaway Farm, and they've been there for many years. But what they've done to create more than a farm it's deeply moving to me. And I know these guys really well. So they won't be surprised to hear me giving them a shout out, but they've created this idea of the commons on that property that includes, education about not just their farm, but about a lot of social justice issues that to me are super important for us to be discussing. And, they brought in an heirloom farmer, another shout out to Akila Campbell, who has an amazing story of working in agriculture, having had a childhood not from around here, But her background was in her family's two diasporas. One was indigenous and one was African. And she ended up on the Tuckaway land through a connection with the Cox family and through the organization that we started called Heritage Harvest Project. I can name drop all over the place, but you've interviewed a lot of the people involved in this. And so Akila now has a plot of land on Tuckaway Farm where she grows these diaspora-inspired ingredients from her family's experience and from her childhood and her culture that are now going to be introduced to our food shed. And some of them are touch and go because they're not meant to be grown in New England. But hopefully, one of the silver linings of climate change is that now we can grow really nice collard greens in New Hampshire.
There you go. All right.
So anyway, I just stuff like that happens on Tuckaway Farm. It's magical, but it doesn't just happen organically, even though everything there happens organically. Yeah. Literally, it happens because people have to care that much.
Yeah.
And everyone there does.
People definitely do care that much. Do you have a date on this year's Pharmacue?
Pharmacue is June 28th. And cool. It's all afternoon. And it's the reason that we created Pharmacue in the first place was to make it affordable. And so you can go to the website for Cultivate and find information about this year's Pharmacue and the pricing and all that. But it's truly an amazing event. Live music is incredible.
Oh God, the food is so good.
It's so good, right?
All different kinds of local people. The breweries are there. Strongly recommend you all check it out. June 28th. It's an event that's put on by Cultivate. I'll get to Cultivate in a second. So almost 20 years of Black Trumpet. We could go, we could get really in the weeds. I want to think big picture. When you look back upon 20 years of Black Trumpet, 20 years in this town is very impressive. We often talk on the podcast just about the amount of change and turnover Portsmouth has commercially, and especially when it comes to restaurants as well. But you guys have stood the test of time in a town that it is hard to stand the test of time in. So when you look back on those 20 years, what do you think are the biggest reasons as to why Black Trumpet is still here doing its thing?
Well, it's back to that thing about being adaptable, right? Resilience is one of the things I've got going for me, but it's not just me. It's the fact that, and I guess this is my core answer to that question, is that every time we've had to adapt, we've had to pivot, we've had to rethink, we've had to re-envision what we are, I've had a staff that's gone along with me. And that is truly extraordinary to think, that people are here with a work ethic. They want to be here. They care about our story. They care about our mission. And they are willing to take a risk to move into that terra incognita and take a chance.
You've had an abnormally high amount of employees who have stayed for a long time.
How did you know that? I love if that's public knowledge, man. That's amazing. Yeah,
I heard you on the Restaurant Unstoppable podcast with Eric. Shout out to him. Yeah, Seacoast Stories alum. This is a very transient business. A lot of times it's an artist who works the bar just as a form of income to support what they really want to do to live in this expensive town. It's often that you don't have industry professionals who are here really who are in it for the long haul.
Well, you just said, I think, a vital phrase there, industry professionals, which is something that as a career has never really taken off in this country. But if you go to Europe, you find people who have chosen careers in front of the house, back of the house. Black Trumpet is an exception, maybe because going back to what I said earlier, we are more than just a place to work. We're a place in the community. We're a place that has a story to tell, and that story evolves every day. So there's never a dull moment. I'll say that. It keeps people stimulated, interested, engaged, and those people are not just our staff, but that translates also to our guests. And I hear from last night, I had a guest who has been coming here really since the beginning, who was commenting on the fact that there are always familiar faces here, and that's part of what makes them feel welcome. But the other thing that distinguishes us maybe a little bit is there's not a dish that you would ever come back and expect to have. And that is, from a business perspective, definitely something that can be viewed as shooting ourselves in the foot. But somehow that script has been flipped, and people now come to my restaurant because we don't have the same thing. And they can count on there being something new on the menu to experiment with or experience.
Interesting. So what is it about Black Trumpet that, we say industry professionals come here and stay here? Why does the talent want to stay here for the long haul?
I mean, so it's sad to say, but I think our industry has a reputation for not having much of a personal touch with its employees. And it kind of goes against the grain of what hospitality means. So I guess, what we ask of our servers and our staff in terms of how they convey our purpose to our guests and how they interact with our guests is the same way that we interact with our employees. And it's got to start with a element of respect and appreciation. And I'm not saying other restaurants don't have that for their staff, because I have a good friend, Sam Hayward, who is an institution in his own right, has had a restaurant far longer than I have. And it's a legendary restaurant in Portland called 4th Street. And he's had employees who have been with him for, I think it's like 28 years now. And that's extraordinary. And I pale in comparison to 4th Street. But I think what we have in common is just starting with that fundamental respect and gratitude for the service that they provide to our business. And I'm constantly recognizing that, if anything, I wish I could do it more. It's a hard career. And it's thankless in so many ways. So, yeah. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And COVID did quite the number on the hospitality industry as well. And people reached all-time levels of burnout who were working in it. And I know this is, a big reason why you started the culinary program, was to try to just go out and recruit talent and get them to want to choose this industry. I also did hear you say on that podcast that in 21 or 22, you actually lost an employee to suicide due to burnout from the industry, which I can't imagine how difficult a period that was for both you and the restaurant.
Yeah, we still think about that. It happened on my birthday. Wow. And I can't have a birthday now really without that horrible memory. And there's so much of the lives of our staff that are imbued in all of us. Like, we carry it with us. And so I carry my memory of Dave every day. Yeah, it's hard.
Has that experience affected the way that you and the team here, really think about how you show up to work every day and how you show up for each other every day?
So I've never been the kind of chef that you see on TV who's whose histrionics are to me unforgivable, but super entertaining, right? And so I think that there's now a lot of talk. There hadn't been ever before, but now in our modern culture, we are actively talking about mental health in our industry. So I've never really consciously acted in a way that I think would compromise the mental health of my employees. And I'm pausing there a lot because I know there are times where the stress of the moment is impacting all of us. It's impacting my mental health as much as anyone else's. But there's so much we don't know, and about, the depths, the layers of the individuals who we work with every day, and no matter what career you're in. I just think every once in a while, it's a really good idea to look someone in the eye and say, "How are you?" So I try to do that, and I've tried to do that more since losing our friend Dave, who was a fantastic cook, and in so many ways was winning at life, and he just didn't know it. So yeah, so I know what the pressures are. I know what the hardships are that this career brings, and I think any chance that I see a window to improve that, I do.
For the restaurant workers, both at Black Trumpet and other establishments on the Seacoast, I mean, we talk a lot about the stresses, the go nature of it. I mean, I know oftentimes that drugs and alcohol are a problem in the kitchens. What are the positives? What are the good things? Why do people show up to work every day and have such a good time?
When I mentioned, so from my own experience, when I mentioned the ADHD translating well into cooking, I'm not saying everyone who works in the kitchen has it, but I think that anyone who has been a misfit in other fields and has maybe tried and failed in something else, whether it's a desk job or veterinarian, or I don't know why I chose that, but whatever that career pursuit may have been, they found a home in our industry because it suits who they are, and it suits their ability to either focus or not focus. And so on many aspects of the spectrum, I think you see opportunities in our world that you don't see elsewhere.
Coming up, why Evan is focused on serving the people who aren't at the table, and a behind-the-scenes look into one of the Seacoast's biggest summer events. That's next, but first, I want to tell you about a recent experience of mine. So I paid a visit to my friend Amber at Studioh, which is a salon right next to Southport Kitchen in Rye. She sat me down, plucked out 4 of my hairs, she put them underneath a scanner, gathered some quick data, and then she sent that data off to a team of researchers in Belgium who promised to return an analysis of my hair health back to us in like 5 minutes. Wild. While we waited, Amber took a fancy camera to my scalp, which gave us a microscopic view of it. It was kind of gross, but also really eye-opening. Amber was a little worried about some things, especially given my diabetes, but overall, we gave my scalp health a B-. She then provided some very easy tips for how to improve my scalp health, like using a scalp brush before I go to bed, and also some foods that would help me get closer to an A+. And after Belgium gave the results back, Amber sent me on my way with some incredible insights and advice for improving my hair health. This entire consultation was a fascinating experience, and Amber was so easy to work with. If you would like to get one of these consultations to see where your hair health stands, Amber is offering my listeners a special deal. And from now through the end of May, you can visit Studioh to get $100 off a hair consultation. It's normally $250. You'll get it for $150. Just book your appointment through the link in the show notes and say that Seacoast Stories sent you. Studioh will then follow up to schedule your discounted consultation. Dagan from Liar's Bench, who we referenced earlier, said on the show previously something that just stuck with me. He has, quote, such reverence for the table and what the table represents. In his case, he loves seeing people at the brewery enjoying a beverage with each other, phones away, and just being present with one another. And I just love for you to, you see people in your restaurant at the table enjoying very delicious meals that come from all over the world. What does it mean to you to see people at the table enjoying restaurant?
I actually love that you asked me that question, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is the idea of who's not at the table. So I'm going to leapfrog right past your question and go to something that came up when I was traveling with Slow Food down in the bayou of New Orleans, and we were meeting some incredible people and tasting some unbelievable food. And the theme of that symposium or that gathering was a seat at the table, I think is what it was called. And the premise was, when we look around our restaurants and we think about dining, whether it's a dining table at home or in our industry, when we look at that table, who's not there? And this was sort of that same bug that was in my head about wanting to make the barn dinner into pharmaceutical, to try to when the first Trump administration happened, we reacted to that here with a woman who was working in my kitchen and I just going back and forth about how women were being portrayed and disrespected. So we started a thing here at Black Trumpet called Women of the World. And every month I worked with a woman from a different country. And because the other people who were being impacted by this administration were immigrants, now we know how bad that got. But at the time, like, we were just in a entry level state of shock. And the solution was for me in our small way, using the vehicle of a restaurant that I have, to illuminate these incredible women from these incredible backgrounds in various countries who were first generation Americans. And so it didn't take long, actually, with just a couple of connections to find 7 or 8, I think we ended up doing, of these amazing women, most of whom were home cooks. Some of them were professional chefs, who came into my kitchen and for one night created this dinner in collaboration with us to highlight the food from their background. And, you know, people always ask me, what's the favorite thing you've ever done? And I love BIPOC Fest. I love Pharmacue. I love the fact that I work with the Walk to End Alzheimer's as their executive chair. Those are all things that are near and dear to my heart. But that Women of the World thing, that was like such a great example of the world turning upside down and us consciously making a choice to try to right it, just through exposure, education, and joy.
That's awesome. And, you know, you reference a lot of the other things that you've got your hands in. I want to talk about BIPOC Fest, which is an amazing annual event that you guys do every summer. You run this alongside Jo Kelley, alongside David Vargas, and a couple of other individuals are very prominent in making this happen.
I'm going to name them.
Yes, I know you're
Marie Collins.
Marie Collins, yes, that's it.
And Jennifer Scumaci.
Oh, yeah.
Both,
I didn't know she was involved.
Oh, yeah. Powerhouse people.
DJ Scooch, right?
DJ Scooch. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. People don't know this about her, but she's actually one of the hardest working, most organized human beings.
Oh, I believe that.
Have you ever talked to her?
Never one-on-one, no.
Okay. I think you should do that.
Okay.
Yeah. She's an incredible human. Anyway, it is my privilege that I get to work with those people. The origin story, which have you already talked about that?
Let's do it.
So there was, you know, in the headlines at the time, the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, numerous other African Americans who were unjustly killed by police around the country. There was a rally in downtown Portsmouth, and it was one of those times where I knew that I had to do something. I knew there had to be action on the ground in our community. And because I'm in a position where, you know, I'm visible enough where if I want to try to affect change, someone's going to listen to me, right? So I found myself backstage listening to the incredibly powerful words of Jo Kelley, who I barely knew at the time. And I ran into my good friend and longtime collaborator, Chef David Vargas, and he and I were both filled with rage. We were angry to the point where we didn't have words, and we sort of like sat there, both of us nodding with this kind of instant awareness that something was going to happen as a result of that moment where we were going to have to do something. I think he said first, we got to do something. I think that's literally what he said to me. We got to do something. And those are dangerous words to say to me. So it was only a matter of days before, you know, we got together and started talking to Jo Kelley, and pretty soon the student from UNH named Marie Collins, who was a very outspoken activist. We became, you know, this fantastic four behind the idea of creating an event that was going to be held in a very visible public place that would draw attention to people of color in our community, to people of color from outside our community. And that's when we decided to call it New England BIPOC Fest. So it was about more than just what was here. We wanted to really spread our wings and celebrate the greater community of cultures and backgrounds and artists and culinarians and chefs and so many just incredible people who unfortunately spend most of their time in the margins. And so one of my rules, the fact that I'm telling you any of this is kind of going against my rule number one. When we finally created Cultivate, which is the nonprofit that's a legitimate 501c3 that took a long time to get registered. But my rule was, I want to do the work here. I want to get this thing off the ground. I will fight for getting it where we think it needs to be. And ultimately we did. And it was at Strawberry Bank where it remains. But I didn't want to be the public face. I didn't want to be the outward face of that event, or of really the organization itself, because the whole point here is that we all have to do work to raise the awareness and raise the profiles of the people who are overlooked in our community. And so I'm sitting here talking to you about it. In no way do I look at that as like, braggadocio or something I want to put on my resume. It's just an example. And that the reason to share this, I think, is that it's an example of what can be done when someone who is in a position of privilege and power to look to what is not there, look to who is not at the table, and make sure they have a seat at the table.
Can you take me back to kind of the pre-George Floyd, pre-COVID times? Obviously, the Seacoast, New Hampshire, very white. How aware was the Seacoast community of the everyday prejudices that people of color in this country face?
I couldn't answer that question. I mean, I can answer that question from my own, filter, my own experience. And I come from a very different background than a lot of the people in this community who are white, in that I had a African-American stepfather. I had a lot of friends when I lived in DC who were African-American, well, actually from everywhere. So I've had diversity in my life experience, and it's meaningful to me. So I noticed it a lot. I have always felt like this community, for all of the great things about it, would be stronger, would be better if it had more diversity, difference of culture, background, philosophy, and I know that a lot of the things that I have to say about this are unpopular with a certain percentage of our population, but I can't imagine that anyone really wants to see true white supremacy, and it's it's staggering to me. And I know it's going to strike a lot of people as naive, but we are stronger and we are better when we are diverse. And history proves that. So if there are people in our community who are fine with it being predominantly white, then that's their vision and their perspective. And I'm not so much out to change that as just to try to have us all be aware and be thinking about it. And that missing seat at the table is going to be different from person to person, from family to family.
Mm-hmm. That rally in 2020 that you referenced, that you and David said, we've got to do something. You said Jo was up on stage talking. Do you remember what she was saying?
Well, I remember that she was speaking out from a perspective that we don't get to hear very often in Portsmouth. And
Jo is also so blunt and transparent.
Oh, yeah.
Such a great communicator. I could listen to her talk all day. Having
a team of people to create that event who had zero tolerance for bullshit was vital to it getting off the ground, I think. Because you have to navigate some gray areas, some bureaucracies and things like that, where not everyone is going to have the same opinion and maybe needs to hear from people who are blunt and direct. So that was helpful, I think, in getting us to getting that event off the ground. But specifically, I don't remember like phrases or things that she said that were inspiring. I just know that after that event, I met with her and I sat at a table right over there, and we dumped on each other our life stories and why this moment in time was pivotal and why we had to do something about it. And I remember a lot of that conversation, which was very personal. So I'm not going to share that here, but I will say that I came away from it not only having a new friend in Jo Kelley, but a shiro, and she has been such a valuable player in everything that I've touched in this community and far more things that I haven't been a part of. So there were organizations in our community who were doing a lot to try to promote diversity, and they remain intact to this day, most of them. And Jo was also involved with many of those. So this shift to focus on the event specifically couldn't have happened without all of the people who were on board, because it was a heavy lift.
Yeah. Shout out Jo Kelley, David Vargas. We are so lucky as a community to have them leading the charge.
Amen.
For BIPOC Fest and so many other important issues. Now, the obvious clear difference is they are people of color. You are not. You said that you would have felt uncomfortable being the face of BIPOC Fest as a white person. Is that still kind of an uncomfortable thing or another internal struggle, or do you face any external criticism as like the white guy who's fronting BIPOC Fest?
I'm sure I do. But I'm uncomfortable right now talking to you about this. So yeah, I don't want anything that I've done or that I do or that I hope to do to ever be viewed as performative, to ever be viewed as anything other than my conviction in my soul that things that are fucked up need to change. And I have an opportunity in where I sit in this community to affect that change, or at least strive for it.
Yeah, that brings up a good point, because I have been accused of being a performative feminist. I think anytime you are especially white man coming from a privileged background and you speak up for underserved communities, some people are going to assume that, you're just checking a box.
Just you and I talking to each other about this is probably pretty cringy for a lot of people. Yeah. And I'm not laughing because it's funny. That was nervous laughter, because I know there is going to be that kind of response from some. And I hope that the context of where I'm coming from and the message that's deep in my heart is what I end up conveying. And let the haters hate. I hope that at some point they have an awakening, and odds are they won't. And that's where we are in this country right now. And I just think we're so overdue for healing and coming together. And I think maybe this is a good way for me to come close to wrapping this up. Restaurants and the table that Dagan referenced, this is the ultimate democratizing place in our hearts, in our minds, in our cultures, in our families. We have an opportunity to use restaurants, to use food and dining as a chance to bring disparate voices and opinions together. And it's part of my vision of what we serve in our community to have tables that, even though our prices are high, and we already talked about that, through the events and things that are auxiliary to what happens in the restaurant, to bring those people together. And it's the only way. It's really the only way we're going to get through where we are. Amen.
Very well said. I agree. The world certainly needs a lot of healing, and restaurants like the ones we have on the Seacoast, including Black Trumpet, are great places for that. So New England BIPOC Fest, I hope to see you all there. September 27th, Strawberry Bank. I will be there. I was there last year. Tremendous event of culture and amazing food. And, it's really a great representation of what the Seacoast is all about. as are you, Evan Mallett. Evan, thank you so much for not only joining the show today, but for all that you do for the Seacoast community. You are a man I look up to and that I know so many other people in the Seacoast look up to as well. You are fighting the good fight. You are doing things that no one has asked you to do, that you are certainly not beholden to anyone to do, but you believe in your heart that these are the right things to do. And I applaud you for that. So Evan, thank you so much. And I can't wait to see what else you've got in store for us.
Thank you, Troy. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Again, that's Evan Mallett of the Black Trumpet in downtown Portsmouth. You can visit the restaurant Tuesday through Sunday, and you can also attend Pharmacue on June 28th and England BIPOC Fest on September 27th. Details for all of these incredible Seacoast gems are in the show notes. Thank you, Evan, for joining, to Dermatology, Skin and Health, Studioh, and Brass Tacks Photography for supporting this episode, and to all of you for listening. If this was your first time here, thank you. I really appreciate you all being here. To stay up to date, you can give us a follow on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, which supports us in our mission of bringing the Seacoast closer together more than you could ever know. I'll be back next week with one of the few remaining episodes of Season 4. But until then, if you see me around town this week, please stop me and say hi. I would love to hear your story. I'll talk to you all soon. But until then, live free or die.